Hey, what's up you guys? Marty Schwartz here, and I have something on my mind I want to share with you. Just imagine it's 1997. You've barely put on your overalls and your snapback hat is just so lightly on top of your dome, and you're about to put in your favorite CD in your Discman. When all of a sudden, poof, 2019 Marty Schwartz is in front of you. Not to warn you about any future wars or impending danger, but to tell you that in the future, Weezer has become one of the most disliked bands in the world. This would certainly be a surprise given that the Blue Album and Pinkerton are two of the greatest rock records of the 90s. But since all of you are in the future with me and have lived through Beverly Hills, Pork and Beans, and I'm Your Daddy, you know the sad truth. To understand why Weezer fell from grace as one of the greatest bands of the 90s, all the way down to one of the most divisive in history, you first have to understand one simple fact. Weezer
have been trolling us for almost 2 decades.
Don't believe me? Well, let's start at the beginning. The success of their self-titled debut surprised all the members of the group, especially the band's frontman. Rivers found the tracks from their first record simplistic and silly and vowed to compose more complex music for their next album, but this task proved to be quite a challenge. After abandoning several different concepts for their sophomore release and having surgery on his leg, Cuomo enrolled at Harvard University to study classical composition. While at Harvard, he grew a beard, walked with a cane due to his surgery, and invested heavily in his studies, hoping that this experience would challenge him creatively. He later joked about meeting students wearing Weezer t-shirts that had no idea who he was. Despite this drastic change of scene, Cuomo's feelings of isolation and rejection drove him to write darker and less playful music. Only 2 semesters before finishing his degree at Harvard, Rivers' desires to reunite his old band outweighed his desire to finish school, so he dropped out early and literally put the old band back together 3 years after their first major success. He and the group then dove headfirst into their second effort, Pinkerton. They recorded many of Cuomo's songs that dealt with the negative feelings he had while studying at Harvard, including Why Bother, Tired of Sex, and El Sport Show. Even though Pinkerton was more in line with the type of music the band wanted to produce, it was a commercial failure. Only later did it receive the critical acclaim that it now has. This release prompted the band to take a hiatus where Cuomo continued to battle his feelings of isolation and depression. It took 5 years for the band to reunite and go back to their roots with the Green Album. Though it was more commercially successful, it didn't have the same organic sound of their debut. It seemed more analytical and formulaic, like they were trying to make a pop record. Many of the tunes were around 2.5 minutes and contained a guitar solo in the middle that simply mimicked the song's melodic hook. This is when Weezer really started to go off the rails. Since the early 2000s, the band has put out several records, each one seemingly more disappointing than the last, including Make Believe, the Red Album, and Hurley. These albums come off as formulaic, are laced with cynicism, and it just seems like the band knows that the work is derivative. This is why I submit that Weezer, and especially Rivers, has been playing a long-form ironic joke on all of us. Pinkerton paints a pretty vivid picture of Cuomo's disillusionment with the rock and roll lifestyle, and is clearly the band's most honest album to date. It's hard to imagine a world where this band can artistically go back to their roots after putting out an album like that. After the commercial failure of Pinkerton and the commercial success of the Green Album, it seems like Cuomo is saying to us through his music, okay then, if this is the music you want, then this is what you're gonna get. In my view, this is why Weezer continues to put out song after song that contains the most juvenile lyrics sitting atop the laziest, poppiest hooks they can come up with. And the morbid curiosity around what they'll do next has created an indestructible band that continues to sell out shows and move a decent amount of records. It almost seems like Weezer is seeing how much they can debase themselves before people will stop buying their records. And like a modern-day Bialystock and Bloom, it seems the further they go, the more attention they get. Even now, their newest efforts seem to be outright comical and speak to this sentiment pretty directly. Their song Back to the Shack seems to be poking fun of the fans that they lost after the millennium. Now, Weezer is not the only band to partake in the long tradition of musical trolling. Earlier in his career, Frank Zappa was told that in order to be successful, he couldn't solely produce instrumental music. He had to write lyrics and give his songs an accessible structure, which is how he ended up with Reuben and the Jets, Freak Out, and most notably, Don't Eat the Yellow Snow. In my view, Weezer's Pork and Beans somewhat emulates the vibes from Zappa's album We're Only In It For The Money. These songs were intentional. They were meant to mock the musical moment of the time. I believe that Weezer's music from the last few years accomplishes the same goal, culminating in the Teal album, a novel group of farcical covers, and the Black album, which could probably snag a Best Comedy Album Grammy if it was nominated in that category. story. Weezer certainly takes the cake for gaming the music business for the longest period of time, but I believe the ultimate modern musical troll is Lady Gaga. Her career is almost Weezer in reverse. Before I continue, I will say Fame Monster era Lady Gaga produced some pretty catchy tunes, but they were unapologetic, self-referential pop songs. Even the way she presented herself in public seemed to make fun of the ludicrous culture that surrounded pop music at the time. I mean, come on, her album was called The Fame Monster. Only now is Lady Gaga producing music and partaking in projects that truly showcase her incredible talent as a musician. Much like how the early Weezer albums showcased Cuomo's talent, and sure, Zappa, Weezer, and Gaga are certainly strange bedfellows. But the thread that connects them is musical satire, which is possibly the most unnoticed ruse our culture has ever seen. With traditional satirists, think The Office's David Brent, Colbert Report's Stephen Colbert, or Late Show's David Letterman, you know what's going on, and that's why it's funny. But with a group like Weezer, it's much harder to nail down. I encourage you to listen to Weezer's music, especially their newer work, with this in mind. If you can find the irony in it and understand that they're shamelessly lampooning the musical moment in the 90s that made them famous, I bet you'll find their later work more enjoyable. Do you still buy Weezer albums? Have I got it all wrong? I'd hate for the kids to think I've lost my cool. Let me know in the comments below, and while you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for supporting Marty Music. We'll see you again soon.